On this episode of Industry Relations, Rob and I discuss the CoStar and Realtor.com rumors. Let's go. This is Industry Relations, a podcast that's at the intersection of real estate and technology from an insider's perspective, with Rob Hahn and Greg Robertson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Industry Relations with Rob and Greg. This is your co-host, the notorious R.O.B. Rob Hahn. And as always, with me is my fabulous co-host, the fabulous Greg Robertson.
Hola, Rob. How's it going, man?
It's going well, man. You know, it's interesting to be Nostrodamus for once, you know,
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah. That's correct. That's correct. Yes. We've had a couple, to me, there's a couple Nostradamus moments. I mean, I think on one of our podcasts, I forget this was whether you or I, but we talked about how we thought that CoStar should buy Matterport because Matterport bought VHT, which had this whole network of photographers and content creators.
Yeah, that was you, by the way. That's not me. That's not a Rob moment. That's a Greg Stradamus moment. I just want to point that out.
You probably brought me there to that because we were talking about big acquisitions, right? That CoStar was going to make, and it turned out Zillow took the bait on that, and they bought another three-letter RDX or something like that.
Some photo company of some kind. Yeah.
Then on another podcast, you had mentioned you could see them buying Redfin, throw away the broker business, or Realtor.com, and fucking let's say a week and a half later, the news hits Real Desk and some others.
Yeah.
That they're talking, right? So I thought that was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
A little chills moment there, Rob.
Hey, but let's this go to my head. Let's also remember that I've predicted that iBuyer will be 60% of the market by 2026. So
right, yeah, that trajectory is a little bit wonky right now. We'll see.
Little bit problematic. I mean, it could still happen. There's a possibility, Yeah. Especially since my whole definition of iBuyer included the power buyers. But given
that's about erased out there, unfortunately.
Given that there's no money to be had in the capital markets, it's probably not going to happen. I'm buying a lot of steak dinners. It's all right.
Yeah.
If you guys hear my dog barking, I apologize. Yeah. She's just being a bad girl. But
no problem. And before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to Katie Smithson, the CRO of CRMLS, for filling in for you last week.
That was awesome. Great episode. I
called her, I gave her 24 hours notice to do that. And I think, some of the questions I was asking, she'd only been at CRMLS for 2 months. And she's like, well, I'll try to answer these, Greg. But she was a good sport about it. And
she's awesome.
But thank you, Katie. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I only wish you guys had done a little karaoke action because honestly, the two of you are the best, unbelievable people to go to karaoke with. I just want to point that out.
Oh, she has a much better voice for sure.
Dude, I don't know. She blew my mind that one time when she did From Hamilton.
Oh yeah, she does all the Hamilton stuff.
Oh my gosh, she just blew my mind. Anyway, so thank you, Katie. Yeah. Absolutely a shout out. All right. And with that out the way, what do you want to talk about? I think we're talking about Realtor.com and maybe NAR.
So you and I both have written about this. And, my take is, somebody woke up and said, Andy woke up or somebody said, okay, let me start off. Let me first start off with something, a little disclaimer. And I put this in the show notes of the last episode you and I were on. Mm-hmm. It seems that that Homes.com actually did upgrade their site, right? We were talking about, when they're going to launch it. They have never made any sort of formal announcement about it. They haven't started a nationwide advertising campaign for it they haven't implemented the enhanced feature listing. So in my mind, I did poke through the site and I hadn't seen any of those things. So in my mind, they haven't launched it yet, but they had made some improvements, an entirely different tech stack in the back. There's some HomeSnap integrations. Mm-hmm. They did add some transaction data for every agent. I did some spot looking at it. They're going back 5 years. Right. So that in a 5-year time period, I don't think you're going to have the issues like a Redfin that was a lot more, the frequency, the fidelity of that was a smaller type of time frame. So that was maybe a way that they worked out of that. I did notice that some of the agents on there, because agents do change brokerages, were still on the previous brokers they were on, but I'm sure they'll figure those things out. So and my bad though for saying that they hadn't launched their new site. They have launched a lot of it. But not, the things that I was looking for did not happen.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I wanted to get that out of the way.
Before we continue with that though, so given that, what do you think the chances are that they do a big like Super Bowl ad?
Well, this is a great question. This is something that I think before this rumor was announced, I would say maybe there would be a high probability, because that seems to smack of Andy Florence's big thing of like, doing a huge promotion type of thing. So,
and he had a lot of success with it with apartments.com, so it's
okay.
In the
playbook.
Go
to the playbook, right? So, I don't know, but I would say probably a better chance than it did until this news that they were talking with RDC was announced, right? Because how do you have basically, and I forget who was I think who was positing this question to us, but we'll name anonymous for this podcast. But those three brands, if you look at HomeSnap, Homes.com, and Realtor.com, can they coexist each other? I know that Zillow has Trulia, but it's really Zillow, right?
It's really Zillow, yeah.
So, if you're going to buy if you're going to buy Realtor.com, how much money are you going to sink more into Homes.com? Arguably a better URL, but you can't get rid of the URL of Realtor.com because it's got all that SEO juice from everywhere. It's got, that's what's known. That's why it has the traffic it does. Yep. But Homes.com traffic is such a distant third. I think somebody did the math and said, we could spend $10 billion trying to get Homes.com to close the gap, or we could just be, Realtor.com and be second right away. That's where I think the process comes from as far as that type of thinking. What do you think?
So I wrote about this whole thing, and I was kind of negative about it overall, because I went through a lot of the thinking, and I'm going, okay, well, multi-brands kind of suck, right, from a traffic growth standpoint. Because, my whole thing was, it's one thing, when Zillow acquired Trulia, it's number one acquiring number two, right? So they didn't have to catch up to anybody, really, right? Whereas with this, they have to catch up quite a bit. Like, even if they acquired Realtor.com, like Realtor.com is like, I think I wrote this, I was like around 90 million monthly uniques. Zillow's like 300, you know what I mean? Like 240, something like that. It's not close. But
hold on. What's Homes.com? Did you find those numbers?
I didn't even look at Homes. They weren't even in the top 10, right?
Yeah. So it's at least you're closer, right?
I know.
It makes a Homes.com thing look, it's a moonshot. It's not a moonshot. It's a fucking Pluto shot, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. All I'm saying is, like, even if you acquire Realtor.com, you still have to make up like so much ground. You know what I'm saying?
But it's less than Homes.com.
Absolutely less. Right. So that's what I wrote. It's like, you're closer, right? But closer isn't close. Right, like,
right.
It would be like, here's the best example of this. To me, this would be like DuckDuckGo acquiring Bing.
Right.
Like, yeah, you're closer, way closer. Yeah. You're not close.
Yeah, yeah.
So the problem was, if Homes.com, the idea was, hey, we're gonna do the Apartments.com playbook, launch a new site with better tech, better whatever. And then we're going to just spend, billions, right, on advertising, hundreds of millions on advertising. We're going to drive traffic to it, and we will catch up eventually. I felt like if you now have two brands that you got to promote, right, you're either spending less of the budget or you have to double the budget, right? It was just, so I'm not saying Andy can't do it, and I'm not saying it would be smart or not smart. I just felt like, well, that's one problem, right?
Well, that problem can be very easily solved. He shuts down Homes.com.
Okay, so that goes to a second problem, right? The second problem I had with it was, and this has always been an issue with Realtor.com, right? But, even back when they were owned by move that was an independent company, right? So before News Corp came in, which is that you don't control the brand, right? And we know when the independent move had Realtor.com, they were under some pretty restrictive
the operating agreement,
licensing, agreement, that whole operating agreement. It was pretty restrictive. And we know that that's one reason why Zillow caught up to them and surpassed them, right? We know that for a fact. Like, that's real estate history, what I've heard, because I hadn't read, the operating agreement between News Corp and NAR is, right? Maybe it's far less restrictive. I have heard that.
I've heard that too.
Right, but fact of the matter is, if CoStar goes and acquires Real.com, okay, cool. Yes, it's the number two website, no question about it. You're going to get 90 million monthly uniques instantly, no question about it. But you don't control that brand, and that operating agreement probably has something in it about that, right? So the issue is, if I'm Andy and I go acquire a brand, and every dollar I spend on that brand enhances that brand, which I don't own, that's a problem, right? It's a little bit like, it's supposed to go the other way. So when you think about, let's say, Realogy, right? Anywhere, okay. They go and license Sotheby's from the auction house, right? Part of what they're getting, though, is that Sotheby's itself does a whole bunch of marketing and branding, right? So it's not like Realogy necessarily is going out and spending hundreds of millions of dollars, promoting the Sotheby's brand, right? They're sort of riding on the coattails of Sotheby's brand doing the marketing. Same thing with BH&G, right? Better Homes and Gardens, the magazine goes out and, publishes and does all this marketing and branding. So the idea is you're going to pay them to ride on that coattail. The only way that sort of makes sense is for NAR to say, and right now they're spending about $40 million a year, right? That's not going to get it done, right? So Andy's going to have to say, okay, if we're going to do this, NAR, we need you to go and spend $400 million a year on promoting the Realtor brand, which will then benefit Realtor.com, and I'll pay you a license fee, rev share, whatever, right? Whatever the deal is. It doesn't make a lot of sense for Andy as CoStar to go and spend $400 million a year promoting Realtor.com, right? Which then benefits NAR and that brand, right? That's another issue with that, right?
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. I hadn't read that post yet. So I don't know. I'm not the expert on the SEO and everything else, but but imagine a message of Realtor.com now is Homes.com. Mm-hmm. The best place to find, it's a strategy where, and this really fills a lot of gaps too, because you hear the normal membership out there, whenever I see these stories go by, is they're all mad at NAR for selling Realtor.com, right? Mm-hmm. We should take over and do our own thing, right?
We still hear about that on social media. It's like, it's been 20 years,
I'm
guys.
saying it's a big thing. Yeah. Maybe this is a way out for Realtor.com. And again, I don't know. To me, it's always not made sense, because there's some sort of SEO technical reason why if you change that URL, half your traffic's going to go away. And that's completely, Andy does not want that, right?
Of course not.
But if they could figure out a way of, that not happening, and just do this successful transition from Realtor.com to Homes.com, that's a good thing. And then I will tell you, from back in the day, and I think we've said this or talked about this before, but I was talking to some guy at Zillow way back in the day, and he was telling me they had done some studies, and that the Realtor.com brand, that thing was actually a detriment, because a lot of people didn't want to go to that site because they didn't want to talk to a realtor. I go to Zillow. I don't want to talk to realtors. I go to Zillow, and it was just a complete misinterpretation by the consumers of like that they're going to Zillow and they don't have to talk to realtors. Where if you're going to Realtor.com, you actually have to talk to agents, and it was a bad. They didn't want to talk to agents right away. It's like walking into the store and a salesperson jumping on you right away. They want time to look around. They don't want that experience. So it could, for Andy, Homes.com has got to be the best URL ever. Right. So, but how do you, I think Zillow's better. If you have apartments.com, well, think of the space we're in.
Sure.
Zillow's its own cultural thing. Sure. But as far as if you're selling real estate, apartments.com and homes.com, we've talked about this. That's a 1-2 knockout. Right. So, but I just don't know. I'm not technical enough to know whether they could pull off a name change and
I don't
keep
know
that
either.
SEO juice.
But
yeah.
so I don't know either, but think about this, right? So let's just say that the strategy is he's going to buy realtor.com, right? Redirect all the traffic to your point. So the homepage of realtor.com now says, hey, we are now homes.com, right? We're going to redirect you to homes.com. All of your account information has now been transferred to Homes. So you could, like you've lost nothing, right? Your profile's the same. Everything's the same. It's just over on homes.com, right? Let's say he does that strategy. Okay. Which might make the most sense from Andy's standpoint. Would NAR ever agree to that?
Again, I think they would agree to it because I think their membership wants realtor.com back. Now, what they do with that afterwards,
right?
It's I don't know.
So think about what that means, right? What that means is what NAR then has to agree to with CoStar, right? Is we're going to let you take all our traffic, right? And after all the traffic is gone, you're going to essentially give back the URL to us. And then we will start anew. That would essentially have to be the deal. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
But I mean, again, in this day and age, after the experience they have in the landscape we are now, does Realtor.com or does NAR look at just having a portal problematic because of legal issues and everything else? And they go back to what they do the best, running NAR, being advocate for home ownership rights, being advocates for their members as far as, and how they're compensated or all the legal issues that have to go with that. I mean, they might it was an experiment. Great. It didn't work out. I mean, it did work out. They might get a big payday for it. Right. Because those rights, that licensing thing probably has, some sort of a, non-assignment that maybe they can get something off of, right? Revenue-wise. So there might be something there.
There might be something there.
I don't think that the notion that Realtor.com I don't think that the notion that the National Association of Realtors does not have a public-facing consumer portal using the URL Realtor.com is so crazy. I think they might not want to. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's crazy.
Look, I think that's entirely possible. All I'm suggesting is the notion of Andy buying Realtor.com just to take the traffic and then releasing the Realtor.com URL back to NAR. It requires NAR to be okay with that. Whether that involves payments, license fees, whatever. Okay, cool. So that's the other thing. The final thing I had, about that, I mean, there were some issues around realtor branding itself, but that's not really the big thing. Was, is this the best use of $3 billion? Right. To me, that's the part that I found the most interesting. Since you didn't read it, I'll tell you, because you'll be like, what the fuck? Like, what are you talking about? Because, the purchase price was $3 billion, right? My thought was, okay, if Andy were to go to every single realtor, right, and say, if you move your membership from NAR to this new associate we're going to set up called the HomeSnap Real Estate Association, right, and we will use HomeSnap as the national MLS.
Hold on. You.
I know. We will pay you $3,000.
Right. Just a shot over the bow, right?
And then when we really think about it, we already know about the 80-20 rule. So really only about 20% of realtors really do any kind of business, right?
Right.
So if you went to those 200,000 realtors and said, we'll pay you $15,000 to quit NAR and join the HomeSnap Real Estate Association. Isn't that a better use of $3 billion?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an option. I mean, it's a way to go for sure.
I mean, it may not be an option. There might be all sorts of legal problems. Maybe they get sued by NAR. Who the hell knows, right? But it's not like a RESPA violation. It's not a fair housing violation. Maybe it's some tortious interference or some bullshit, but it's like, what's the tort?
They come up with a new code of ethics.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of infrastructure there that he'd have to put in place.
Or
I mean,
no
you can tell
infrastructure.
people
Yeah.
what?
Or no infrastructure. In
Well,
other
I mean,
words,
what is the benefit of me leaving one organization that has the code of ethics, that has the pull they do on in DC to make sure my job and home ownership, you know, continues. I mean, what is it, just to drain the coffers?
$15,000 is your benefit.
Right.
Between you and me, come on, Greg, how many of the 200,000 top agents do you think would say, oh, no, screw that?
Yeah.
I'd say like 90% of them are going,
it's a thought.
HomeSnap Real Estate Association, here I come. 90% of them. Right.
It's a thought.
Right. So the other 10% go, okay, we'll give you 150,000.
Right.
Dude, to me, if you're Andy Florence, you want to spend $3 billion and you want to crush real estate, that's how you do it.
But does he want to crush real estate? He
what I mean
wants
is
agents.
like crush real estate in terms of like own it, right?
Right.
You want to compete against Zillow, you want to screw them over. To me, that's how you do it.
Right. You know, I'll a little anecdotal about the $3 billion. I was able to kind of watch. I mean, I wasn't an inmate, but I did watch via Instagram Live I think it was one of the first sessions, and it happened to be the morning after they made the announcement of the CoStar RDC deal, and it was Brad interviewing Spencer and Pete Flint, right? So that was great, just that you had these two guys that ran these portals now get to be the first to comment on stage about this, and
yeah,
they had a couple interesting stories about, you know, I guess back in the day, News Corp went to Pete Flint about Trulia, and that obviously didn't happen, but
sure,
that was kind of interesting to find out. And then, you know, the first thing, you know, I think one of the first things Spencer said was like, well, you know, their Ops City model and the referral model, he would have to get rid of that and everything else. And I love the way that Brad snapped back at him like, well, Zillow lied for years and then changed their business model. What would stop them to do it? And it was just like, oh, you know, one of those kind of things. I'm not sure everybody caught that. It's kind of inside baseball.
Yeah.
But then Spencer came on, and I don't know if he was just trolling everybody, if this is tongue in cheek, but the first thing he says is like, I think $3 billion is cheap. And to me, that was brilliant on a couple levels. Number one, because, you know, that's a good comp for Zillow in a sense, right? So any multiple of that, it behooves him as a shareholder of Zillow to say, you know, to up the price of that.
Sure.
The second thing it does is makes a competitor. Maybe that gets back to News Corp or Move, and they go, well, we're rethinking that. Spencer thinks this is cheap. Now it's $4 billion, and that helps him out there.
Right.
So that was one thing. The second thing he said in talking about iBuyers is that he thinks that if he was running Open Door, he would buy OfferPad. And I'm not sure anybody in the audience knew this, but, you know, OfferPad was launched, I think, on a SPAC that Spencer, I mean...
Yeah, no, everyone should know
Spencer,
that.
So here he is
Spencer
saying...
SPAC, yeah.
Here he is saying, like, oh, they should buy my company. Which I thought was hilarious.
It's cute, yeah.
So he was going back and forth with a couple things that I thought was like next level. But then he says, at the end, it's like, and also if I was Open Door, I'd pull everything from the MLS and just, you know, and save that money on the compensation from the agent. So I'm like, what? So now it's like he's saying, I mean, I guess we all knew that, and I think he was saying in the context if he was Open Door, right?
Yeah.
But it's something we've talked about where he's saying, you know, don't put it on the MLS, which is again antithetical of like,
well, they're not putting it on the MLS. What they're not for 14 days.
For 14 days, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. There's already kind of...
It's already kind of headed down that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, look, I mean, so it's really interesting when you think about it. Like, what is the strategic goal here, right? And for Andy, sure, traffic, you know, you want to be the largest portal, right? But there's two ways of getting there, right? One is to grow your traffic organically. The other is to chop the legs out from the largest portal. And if you become the national MLS, you chop the legs off from the largest portal. Period. End the story.
Right. Well, I mean, but are they chopping the legs off of Zillow?
Of course they are. Think about
Right.
this. So let's do this thought experiment. All right. So they go and offer. So say the offer price ends at $5 billion, $6 billion, right? Now they go to every single realtor in the country and go, you move over to HomeSnap Real Estate Association, we'll pay you $6,000. Right? And you're going to join HomeSnap as the national multiple listing service. All the listings will be in HomeSnap. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to do fair display guidelines as part of the MLS's rules. Now, Zillow, if you want the data, you have to abide by fair display guidelines.
Right.
Dude, that would chop the legs out from under Zillow. Knowing that Zillow can't have that, so Zillow's going to be like, okay, guess what? We're now a national MLS. Right? I mean, they have to. You know, they have to.
Right. I mean, it is a factor of like, I get where you're coming from. I mean, where is that best spent? But I think there still has to be a lot of money spent on the infrastructure to make that happen, right? I mean, if you're going to run a national MLS, that's going to take,
Why?
Some infrastructure to pull off, right?
Why? What infrastructure do you need? You need a database?
Compliance. You need, talk
Do
to
you need
anybody running an
compliance?
MLS now. Of course you need compliance.
Why?
I mean, I think everything that an MLS does makes that data the best data out there. And that doing that requires a lot of people, a lot of thought and energy to make that happen, right?
Let's put it this way, right? Fine. So we'll go about it this way. So CoStar, in addition to doing this, right, goes and offers Bright MLS and all of its shareholders $500 million. Right? Mm-hmm. And HomeSnap Real Estate Association, HomeSnap MLS is actually Bright MLS, just renamed. You don't think they can handle compliance for the country?
Well, I think the ambition that CRMLS and Bright MLS is kind of unmatched out there. So I think that would definitely be in their.
I think they could absolutely handle compliance for the entire country. And CoStar right now has something like 15,000 researchers for the commercial division, right? Making phone calls to landlords and stuff. They can't have 1,500 compliance help desk people, located in the Philippines or some shit. Of course they can. I don't think, what infrastructure? You go to not CoreLogic, because CoreLogic, they try to buy CoreLogic, didn't work. But you go to Black Knight and say, hey, we need a copy, right? We need an install of a Paragon for 1.5 million members. Would you want to do that deal? They come to you. They come to the local.
Exactly.
Hey, we want cloud statement for 1.5 million members. You're gonna say no? Of course not. What infrastructure? It's just money. They have all the money in the world.
Well, I mean,
I think we just terrified every MLS CEO listening to this podcast.
Well, I guess, to me though, it's like, or they want to be chosen to be Bright, if Bright MLS is going to say no, they're next in line. Yeah. And I hate to, it's an interesting thought, and I'm not trying to throw all these little details to whatever, but I see where you're going with it. I mean, yeah, it's out there, right? But hey, you've made some accurate predictions before, so we'll see what happens.
This one is, I do not think this one is accurate.
Yeah.
Let's be clear about this. It was more of a thought experiment.
Yeah.
Right. Because here's the thing. What I find super interesting is in the industry, we just tend to think like, oh, big company spending billions to make an acquisition. When Zillow went and spent $500 million on showing time, people are like, oh my God, people freaked out. I'm like, if you thought about alternative use of capital, you'd freak out even more.
Right.
That's the point there, So
okay, so let's break it down, because I know we have to end here in about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Not got about 10.
What's your prediction? Okay. What's your prediction? Are we going to? Is that deal going to happen? Was just fluff? Is that meant to kind of just some saber rattling?
My gut tells me it's going to happen.
Disinformation strategy.
No, my gut tells me it's going to happen. But I'm real 50-50 on it, right? Because to me, the strongest argument for it happening is, and I wrote this in my post, right? We know that Andy Florence really, really likes and respects REA Group, right, out of Australia. And REA is 20% owner of Move. Now, granted, it's all under Rupert Murdoch, right? So it's kind of like inside the family. But still, I could see CoStar buying the 80% that News Corp owns and keeping REA Group as the 20% owner, right?
Yeah.
I could see them maybe even doing a deal where they buy 50%, have REA Group buy the other 30%, and now they're 50-50 partners in Realtor.com. Right? Yeah. And instead of having Realtor.com be run by Homes.com people, he has REA Group run Realtor.com using fair display guidelines, all the stuff that REA Group already has proven that they can do, right? In Australia, all the seller side revenue models and all that. So I could see it happening for that reason, right? And then maybe, the other reason to maybe do it is it's kind of like the worst kept secret, I think, in the industry that NAR hates and fears CoStar, right?
Yeah.
From back in the Xceligent days. So is this a way for them to maybe go to NAR with some sort of offer, to your point, hey, you know what? How about we pay you $30 million a year for licensing, and after 5 years, you could have Realtor.com back, right? And in fact, we'll fund it. We'll give you $100 million to redo Realtor.com as your own portal, right? And during those 5 years, we're going to take the traffic. We're going to do what we can. Maybe NAR says, you know what? CoStar's a friend now, right? And there may be some real strategic advantages.
Yeah, I mean, it's the amount of money they spend at their conferences, right? It's like they're moving in that direction for sure, right?
Right? And it's like, yeah, 7 million, 8 million, whatever. I'm like, yeah, but that's flower, but that's like lunch money budget for CoStar. And that's the thing. I think what scares the industry is we're just not used to companies of that size and that scale of resources, fucking around with us. Do you remember about 10 years ago, there was a real concern that Google was going to come into this space?
Or Amazon, I think is the one I heard
Amazon,
the most of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everyone just freaked out because, we're used to, and back then Zillow was significantly smaller, right? So we were used to Zillow, we're used to Realogy, we're used to those types of, that level of scale. And all of a sudden here's, companies that's valuations measured in trillions, hundreds of billions. And it just became like we couldn't even wrap our heads around it, So there's a part of me that feels like there's a real chance it happens, right? But on the other hand, there's a real chance it doesn't because of the things that we just mentioned, right? Yeah. Like the fact that, okay, you bought Realtor.com, how are you going to market it? How does that all play out? Is there a better use of funds? What's your goal ultimately,
Yeah, and segueing off of that, I mean, I still go back to, and I think we are both in agreement there, is like, the strategy that Andy Florence has cannot be, we're going to beat Zillow.
No.
So again, you made a prediction with this Home Snap Association, but what is the game here? Is it that he is going to be, our strategy's been number 2, and this gets us number 2, and we're going to make some money there, and we can make a successful business. Is that it?
No.
I mean, because it can't be he's going to take over Zillow. No.
Look, man, we've talked about it over in a couple of previous episodes. I wrote an entire 100-page paper, right, on why I think CoStar is entering residential real estate.
Check the show notes.
Yeah, it's on my Notorious Rob. It's a red dot report. But so I'll give you the short version. The short version of it is, you look at CoStar's valuation, $33 billion or whatever it is today, right? Only a portion of it comes from the LoopNet part, which is the portal for commercial real estate, right? The most of the value comes from the CoStar part, which is a commercial MLS. Okay, commercial real estate is roughly a third of the size of residential real estate. So if I'm Andy, if I become the national residential MLS, my valuation should be like 90 billion, 100 billion. To me, that's the end game, right? And he's not going to go and be aggressive. That's why the whole HomeSnap Real Estate Association thing is, just a fun thought experiment. He doesn't want to do it in some hostile way. He wants to do it when Department of Justice, and I know we're maybe trying to get to that. We'll talk about it next week. When all the lawsuits, all that stuff comes in and they hammer and shatter the MLS. He wants to be there to like pick up the pieces and be like, I'm your friend. Let me rescue you. That sort of thing. I think that's still the goal, right? The Zillow thing comes after that, right? You become the national MLS for residential real estate. You're a $100 billion company.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll talk. I know a lot of people were maybe expecting us to talk about the DOJ thing, but we'll do that next week. And I think that filters in nice.
That way you'll have some time to read my 2 posts on the subject.
No, I've read that one. I did read that one.
Okay.
Right. That was good as well. But I hadn't read the other one, but I did read your thoughts on that for sure.
Maybe that one we'll see if we could bring on like an actual attorney. To tell me all the ways in which I'm wrong.
I know in that article you called out. Can somebody give me a shout about like?
Yeah.
Was it the Turing? That's not the right.
The Tunney Act.
The Tunney Act, right? So,
but
because didn't CMLS put some attorneys on stage that were former people from there,
from DOJ and FTC? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it would be interesting it's a done deal. So I guess whatever your concerns was, they didn't. You found out some. I think you had an update to that, but
yeah. And Ed Zorn from CRMLS has been commenting, on the blog, and he's been raising some really good points. And this is one of those things. Like, look, man, I'm not trying to argue or fight. Like, I actually really want to know because I'm not an antitrust expert. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Next week's show, tune in when we're going to talk about the NAR versus US and what it means, and whatever, all that stuff.
Absolutely.
All right, man. God, I thought we would have be able to get to a lot more. This always happens. We need to start doing Joe Rogan stuff 4-hour shows.
You keep saying that. First of all, I've got to find 4 hours of my day that I could do that. Because the reason we have to get off so soon is both of us have our day jobs. And I got my next meeting here in 10 minutes. So,
all right, brother. Always great to see you. And again, always want to thank our listeners. That we wouldn't bother doing this for y'all. So thank y'all. And
we're looking for a sponsor for February. So if you're interested in sponsoring industry relations, we really appreciate it. So please reach out.
Take care, everybody.